Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has led to the largest migrant crisis in Europe since World War II. According to the United Nations, there were 5.8 million Ukrainian refugees in Europe as of October 3rd, 2023. As a result of the war, approximately 20% of Ukraine's population is said to have remained abroad since February 24th, 2022. According to Eurostat, the EU countries that have taken in the most Ukrainian refugees are Germany, 1,175,000, Poland, 960,000, and the Czech Republic, 365,000. These three countries account for 60.2% of the total number of Ukrainian refugees. More than 100,000 Ukrainian refugees have settled in Spain, Bulgaria, Italy, Romania, the Netherlands, and Slovakia. One of Russia's most prevalent manipulative narratives is discrediting Ukrainian refugees. Its primary target, foreign audiences. Disinformation campaigns are being used to discredit and distort the public's perception of Ukrainians in the EU. These Russian propaganda operations are aimed at constructing myths about the refugees from Ukraine in the minds of Europeans. Moscow consistently employs the topic of Ukrainian refugees in its efforts to influence public opinion in European societies, particularly in countries that house a large number of Ukrainians. After analysing Russian sources that broadcast the Kremlin's position to audience in the EU, despite the system of bans, we identified 6 key myths about Ukrainian refugees. We also debunked each and every one of these manipulations. Keep watching for the first myth.
Myth 1. Fake refugees.
Russia says most of the Ukrainian refugees came from areas where there are no hostilities. The truth is, whether or not there has been direct military conflict in the refugees' hometown bears no influence on their refugee status. Russia is waging an all-out war against Ukraine. Throughout Ukraine, there is a risk of missile assaults on a daily basis. Russia's attacks have resulted in civilian casualties, even in Ukraine's most western regions. As a result, categorizing Ukrainian refugees based on where they came from, the rear of a war zone, for example, is an open manipulation. Furthermore, this type of staticization of Ukrainian refugees runs counter to the fundamental normative documents governing this issue in international law and EU legislation.
Myth 2. Ukrainians live only on social benefits.
Russia claims that Ukrainians are a burden on the budgets of EU countries. They say they don't want to work and enjoy the system of benefits, free medical care, and pensions. The truth is, almost 2 million labour contracts and over 35 billion euros spent by Ukrainians is in the EU. Here, there are 3 arguments to refute this claim. According to official data, Ukrainian refugees spent $20 billion abroad in 2022 and signed 1.87 million labour contracts in 17 EU countries. Thus, 60% of able-bodied refugees from Ukraine have jobs. As part of the summer of 2023, Ukrainians' expenses abroad averaged 1.2 billion euros per month. The European Commission's report highlights this issue for growth of the European Union's economy, a shortage of staff, and so they must attract foreign workers.
Myth 3. Governments help Ukrainian refugees more than their own citizens.
Ukrainian refugees are entitled to more benefits than the actual citizens of the nation. The truth is, the rights of Ukrainian refugees are guaranteed by EU law. The EU activated the Temporary Protection Directive for the first time in its history, a few days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, by unanimous decision of member states. This directive, which currently governs the legal status of the majority of Ukrainian refugees in the EU, grants them the access to rights previously reserved for EU citizens or permanent residents. Simultaneously, each country controls the amount of financial assistance at the national level.
Myth 4. Ukrainians are prone to anti-social lifestyle.
Russia claims that Ukrainian women in the EU are forced to sell their own bodies and men turn to crime. The truth is, individual cherry-picked cases do not reflect the real situation of Ukrainians abroad. Russian propaganda, in fact, works by exaggerating the problems of small social groups to equate them to that of the entire population of Ukrainians living abroad. This gives the impression that all Ukrainians are like this, which is obviously not the case. The majority of adult Ukrainian refugees hold advanced degrees or qualifications that allow them to work legally in the EU.
Myth 5. Ukrainians are carriers of Nazi ideology.
Russia claims that a large number of Ukrainian radicals and so-called neo-fascists have infiltrated the EU, potentially destabilizing European countries. The truth is, Russian propaganda calls any manifestation of Ukrainian national consciousness as Nazism. Sociological surveys show that Ukrainian society is tolerant and xenophobia is extremely rare compared to other Eastern European countries. Furthermore, there is no evidence to support this myth. There have been no cases of propaganda or manifestations of intolerance by Ukrainians in the EU.
Myth 6. Ukrainians can destabilize the political situation in the EU.
Russia propagates a threat concerning how Ukrainian refugees could react if aid cuts were made, organizing serious riots in European countries. The truth is that all EU actions concerning the support of Ukraine have so far been in unison. Ukrainian political culture is based on democratic principles, so the right to protest is guaranteed even in times of peace. At the same time, street actions in Ukraine are not characterized by violence and the destruction of fellow citizens' private property. There have been no violent incidents reported at public events in support of Ukraine. However, there is still the possibility of provocation by Russians abroad or pro-Russian actors, but it is the responsibility of local law enforcement agencies to prevent such incidents. As we can see, all of Russia's myths about Ukrainian refugees abroad are based on two methods. One, an exaggeration of individual cases that are not systemic to all Ukrainians, and two, a generalization of negative images used by Russia in domestic propaganda to describe the entire Ukrainian people. With the European Parliament elections in 2024 approaching, Russia is likely to step up its efforts to discredit national governments in EU countries by exploiting the issue of Ukrainian refugees. Manipulation of Ukrainian refugees is common in the information environment of populist and right-wing radical movements, as well as EU political parties. Thus, this topic is part of the Kremlin's indirect influence on Europe's political and social stability, which is carried out through radicalization of public sentiment. That is why it is important for the progressive forces of the United Europe, government and civil society, to take care of the information protection of Ukrainian refugees. This is a common challenge for our security.